Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to be issuing a statement on some issues condemning Wei Jinsheng and the Chinese supremacists who have been demonizing Uyghurs online. Recently, Wei Jinsheng, the leader of the so-called Overseas Chinese Democracy Coalition, has made numerous statements online demonizing the Uyghurs. He has been echoing racist propaganda similar to those made by the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party, denying China's ongoing genocide of Uyghurs in occupied East Turkestan and labeling Uyghurs as extremists, terrorists, and racists. It seems very clear from his recent comments that Mr. Wei Jinsheng has not removed the Chinese communist and fascist indoctrination that he received in his youth and during his time as a Communist Red Guard and PLA soldier. His recent statements show his true character and ideology, one that is not compatible with democracy and democratic ideals, but one that rather deeply espouses the ideology of communism, ultranationalism, and Chinese chauvinism. In addressing the racist and false revisionist propaganda that Wei Jinsheng has been spreading, we want to clarify that genetic and archaeological research proves that the modern Uyghurs didn't originate from Mongolia in the 9th century, but rather they are indigenous to East Turkistan, unlike what the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese supremacists like Wei Jinsheng falsely claim. Genetic research shows that the modern Uyghurs are the direct descendants of the ancient Indo-European and Turkic peoples that have been inhabiting East Turkestan, or what the Chinese call Xinjiang, meaning the colony or the new territory, for over 6,000 years. Genetic research found that the modern Uyghurs are an admixture of the Caucasian Indo-European peoples inhabiting East Turkestan and the Han, which the Chinese call Xingnu, Turkic tribes of Central Asia. Genetic researchers concluded that the admixture initially occurred around 2,200 to 2,900 years ago. Contrary to the false narrative put forth by the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese supremacists like Wei Jinsheng, Uyghurs have a very long history of independence and statehood in East Turkestan. Throughout their long history, the Indo-European and Turkic ancestors of the modern Uyghurs established dozens of empires and states across East Turkestan and the whole of Central Asia. It wasn't until 1759 that our nation began to decline and come under foreign occupation. East Turkestan was invaded by the Manchu Qing Empire in 1759, leading to 42 national uprisings against the Qing Empire from 1759 to 1865. The Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples of East Turkestan regained their independence in 1865 by establishing the state of East Turkestan, also known as Kashgaria, under Yaqub Beg. As a result of great power competition between the British and the Russian empires in the late 19th century, the Manchu Qing Empire tasked the Han Chinese general Zhou Zongtang with invading and occupying East Turkestan in 1877. This resulted in the fall of the state of East Turkestan following the death of Yaqub Beg. On November 18, 1884, the Manchus formally incorporated East Turkestan into their empire as Xinjiang, which was initially translated as the colony according to the Chinese English dictionaries from 1884 and is now commonly translated as the new territory. For decades, the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese supremacists falsely deny the Chinese invasion, colonization of East Turkestan. However, historical records and the very term Xinjiang, which again means the colony or the new territory, which the Chinese referred to East Turkestan, clearly shows that East Turkestan was invaded, occupied, and colonized by the Chinese even after the fall of the Manchu Empire in 1912. In fact, in 1921, Chinese leader Sun Yat-sen, who is also known as the modern founder of China and Chinese democracy, explicitly wrote in his book, The International Development of China, about the need for the Chinese to colonize Mongolia and East Turkestan, which he referred to as Xinjiang. If East Turkestan was a part of China, as the CCP and Chinese revisionist supremacists falsely claim, why would the Chinese need to occupy and colonize it? Moreover, the people of East Turkestan declared independence twice in the 20th century as the East Turkestan Republic. The first time in 1933 until 1934, which was overthrown as a result of Soviet intervention and invasion by the Republic of China. And the second time again in 1944, which lasted until 1949 before being invaded and occupied by the then newly established People's Republic of China. At the time of Chinese occupation of East Turkestan in December 1949, the Chinese occupation forces and their colonists made up less than 6% of East Turkestan's population. Today, due to decades of Chinese occupation, colonization, and genocide, the Chinese colonists and occupation forces make up over 40% of East Turkestan's population. Millions of Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples have been brutally killed by Chinese occupation forces through various means, from massacres of entire villages to nuclear testings, to forced abortions, to forced sterilization, organ harvesting, torture, and summary executions. Contrary to the popular misconception, the current systematic colonization, genocide, and occupation of East Turkestan by Chinese occupation forces are not new, as it has been occurring on and off for over 100 years. While the political ideology of various Chinese administrations may have seemed to have changed, the Chinese occupation forces' desire to occupy, colonize, and eradicate East Turkestan and its people has not changed, nor is it something unique to only the Chinese Communist Party and the current so-called People's Republic of China. The conflict between East Turkestan and China is not one over ideology, but rather an international conflict between two different nations or states. The nature of the relationship between the Uyghur and other Turkic peoples of East Turkestan and the Chinese government and its people is one of that of an occupied country versus a foreign occupier, or a colonized nation versus a colonial power. Opposing Chinese occupation and colonization of our country is not only our right, but our duty under established international laws. It does not make us terrorists or extremists or racist for wanting to be free of foreign Chinese occupation. If we use Wei Jinsheng's delusional logic and the delusional logic of Chinese supremacists like him and the Chinese Communist Party, then one could argue that the Chinese people themselves are terrorists, extremists, and racists for having opposed Manchu and Chinese and Japanese occupation of China. China and its occupation forces, including the Chinese colonial settlers, have no right to East Turkestan, just like the Japanese forces and Japanese colonists had no right to China during World War II. The people of East Turkestan do not need nor want the support of so-called democratic Chinese forces or any other Chinese forces to achieve human rights. Our issue is not about human rights. It's about national sovereignty and foreign occupation and colonization. If the Chinese democratic forces and other Chinese forces truly want to help East Turkestan or the Uyghur people, then they need to respect our national sovereignty and urge China and its occupation forces and their colonists to end their illegal occupation, colonization, and genocide in East Turkestan. It is evident from the actions and statements made by China, its occupation forces, the Chinese Communist Party, the various Chinese administrations over the past 100 years, and even Chinese supremacists disguised as so-called Chinese democracy activists and human rights defenders like Wei Jinsheng, that restoring East Turkestan's independence is the only way to guarantee and ensure the fundamental human rights, freedoms, and very existence of the Uyghur nation. We want to make it clear to Wei Jinsheng, his so-called Overseas Chinese Democracy Coalition, all Chinese forces, and the whole of the international community that East Turkestan and its people, especially the Uyghur nation, will no longer tolerate Chinese occupation, colonialism, racism, and Chinese chauvinism in any form. We call on the European Parliament, the National Endowment for Democracy, and other relevant entities across the world to condemn Wei Jinsheng's racist and supremacist attacks against the Uyghur nation facing genocide and rescind the awards that they have given him. Lastly, while we are grateful that many governments, organizations, and individuals worldwide are speaking out against China's genocide of Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples in occupied East Turkestan, we call on them to address the root cause of the ongoing genocide and understand the end goal of China's genocide, why China is committing genocide. China is waging genocide against Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples of East Turkestan to ensure Chinese supremacy, occupation, and colonization of East Turkestan. We call on the international community to urgently act against Chinese colonization, genocide, and occupation in East Turkestan by recognizing East Turkestan as an occupied country and by supporting our case against China and its occupation forces at the International Criminal Court, and by supporting the fundamental rights of East Turkestan and its people to regain their independence. Thank you.